Hello Internet and welcome back to another video on the EJ Black YouTube channel. This is just going to be a short video about a statement that Ben Shapiro made a while ago, but I only saw it recently thanks to a YouTuber called Dupli. I'll link his channel in the description and I'll link the video that I specifically watched. But I just wanted to comment on this because I feel like I have a little bit of insight about this topic. I'm working on another video right now. I still need to edit it. I've already recorded it. But I feel like this is going to be shorter, and so this one will probably come out first. But regardless, let's talk about Shapiro's comment.
Criticism of rock along the same lines as my criticism of rap, which was that rock was an actual degradation of skill for music from jazz, which was actually a degradation of skill from classical. That the amount of talent and work, mostly work, that you have to put into mastering a classical instrument is a lot higher than the amount of talent that you and work you'd have to put into playing three chords in a rock song.
There are two problems with Ben Shapiro's criticism of music here that I want to talk about. First of all, I want to say, and this is pretty obvious, I don't think I need to go over this, in fact Dupli does himself, music isn't just a measure of the amount of effort and the amount of talent that goes into it, obviously, because there are more talented people than you all the time. So by that logic, you'd only be allowed to listen to the most talented artist. So Ben Shapiro shouldn't have anyone listen to him playing violin, and so he should have never learnt violin because there are people who can play it better than him. Do you see how it's kind of pointless to say you can only listen to the most talented? People need variation, including myself. I don't just listen to one genre. I don't just listen to hip-hop. I listen to, black metal a lot, jazz, funk. So for someone who listens to a lot of different music, you can't just say, well, you're not listening to the most talented genre, therefore your genre takes no talent. Because first of all, talent is variable. You can have talent in different aspects. Like you can have talent in songwriting without having talent in being able to play instruments. So there's different types of talents, but also the amount of skill it takes doesn't necessarily denote how good the song is. But anyway, that was more a minor critique. The main thing I wanted to say is how Ben Shapiro doesn't seem to understand even the flow of music. He said that jazz is a degradation of classical music, and rock is a degradation of jazz, and hip-hop is a degradation of rock. But he's missing all these steps in between. First of all, this is only paying attention to Western music, but I'll go along his lines and say, Western music is the only music because he can't pay attention to anything else. So we'll say, okay, it's just Western music. Folk came first, right? Because folk is really a select all term for music from pre-classical era. Even though there are more specific periods that some people will refer to when talking about music, most people refer to the pre-classical era as just folk. So we'll say we start with folk, right? Now folk is pretty simplistic most of the time. There are some complex songs, but if Ben can boil down the complexity of an entire genre to its average, then that's what we have to do as well to try and play his game. So yes, folk is sometimes complex, sometimes simple, but most of the time it was pretty simple. Then we go to classical. Classical is more complex. So in Ben's opinion, that complexity of classical is the superior state. That's where we want to be, right? Everything degrades from here according to Ben. Now next, after classical, we have Baroque. It doesn't go straight to jazz. Now I know Ben knows this because he's classically trained. So yesterday when I was recording, I didn't really talk about why Ben does this, and I think it's important to do so for the main point, so I'll cover it now. So the reason Ben misses the Baroque period but talks about the classical period is because he wants to make a clear line of degradation, right? He wants to say classical is a superior form of Western music, and it's constantly been degrading since then. And so if he points out areas where it didn't degrade or it got better, that wouldn't fit his major point of music is constantly getting worse and this classical period is a superior time. Because he wants to make the point that the superior time to be alive was the classical period and that Western culture is constantly degrading. And he can't make that point if he includes time periods that show that that's not true. And I know he knows there are more time periods than just the classical period. So we've got Baroque, which some would say is more complex, some would say is more simple. Again, we might put it on like the same level, right? And then we have jazz. Now, Shapiro thinks that jazz is less complex than classical. I would argue the complete opposite. Most of classical's complexity, at least how we see classical's complexity now, is about playing fast. There's a lot of stuff about keys and about how notes work together, but the most complex stuff that they did compared to today's standards is just playing fast. Whereas with jazz, you've got playing fast, obviously, but then you've also got a lot of different time signatures. You've got more instruments. And also, because there is a lot more predominance on a few instruments, even though there's more instruments that you can use, there's a lot more predominance put on instruments like the saxophone and the guitar, you have to learn to use those instruments very differently. So now we're looking at talent not just as how you play the instrument, but songwriting. And that's something Ben Shapiro doesn't seem to take into account, because he can't possibly comprehend that just because you're playing the instrument better doesn't mean you're a better musician. Then he says from jazz you go to rock, right? Okay, so let's say from jazz you go to rock, and I would argue that rock is probably more simple than jazz. But then after rock, you've got metal, and I would argue that metal is more complex, but it comes after. So how does this work in his mind? Now you might say, well, I don't see metal as more complex, but metal is more technical. In fact, genres like technical death metal have a pure focus on their technicality. That's their whole thing. And by Ben Shapiro's logic, technicality is the most important thing. So technical death metal should be one of the superior genres in his modern ears. But he doesn't seem to like technical death metal for some reason. And it's because he cares more about songwriting than he does about technical ability. He just won't admit it. And to go to the most important point that he keeps harping on, and why he always brings this up, it's the argument against hip-hop. He just doesn't like hip-hop. And you don't have to like hip-hop, obviously. But to say it requires no talent is an easy way out for him to say, well, these guys require no talent, so therefore they're not good at music, and that's why my music taste is the best music taste. It's a baby way of saying, I don't understand this type of music, and because I don't want to consume it, I don't want to admit that there's any talent involved. There is talent in hip-hop. I think that hip-hop is closer to jazz than something like rock is. So he should like hip-hop more than he does rock, because it relates to that jazz that he likes more than rock. But he doesn't, because he sees hip-hop as a degradation of rock, because he doesn't understand music. And all of this is to say, why should we trust Ben Shapiro on these bigger topics if he doesn't even understand the smaller topics that are easy to comprehend and easy to research? He can't even understand this basic information, right, on a topic that he studied music. So why should we trust him for more important things where it's harder to research and harder to understand? He doesn't understand climate change. He doesn't understand politics. He doesn't understand anything he talks about. It's just a game of who looks better to him. It's not what's actually better. It's what looks better on a surface level. And we can see that because classical does look better on a surface level. If you print out sheet music for classical and sheet music for rap, wow, the classical has all these different notes in it. That's crazy. They must be better. But obviously there's a lot more to music than just the notes that you can write down on paper. Now you might think that Ben Shapiro talking about music is actually quite old and he doesn't do it anymore, but obviously there was that major WAP incident that got really popular, so he's still on about this and he still shows that he just doesn't understand music. I wouldn't normally bring up an old clip of someone because I think it's kind of irrelevant to what they're going for now, but there's a clip of Ben Shapiro saying that J. Cole in his song Wet Dreams supports pedophilia. Sorry, so I also should mention, you might think to yourself, why would it be bad? Why would I be calling out Ben Shapiro for calling out pedophiles? And I think there's nothing wrong with calling out pedophiles if it's real. But the evidence that Ben Shapiro uses is really flimsy, and so I think he's making a completely false accusation. The main points Ben Shapiro makes, he's got two main reasons for why he thinks J. Cole supports pedophilia, or is at least promoting it in this song. So the first reason is because he's reminiscing about a relationship he had as a teenager. And so by Ben Shapiro's logic, by reminiscing about this relationship he had as a teenager, he's encouraging that adults should enter relationships as teenagers. And I don't think that logic necessarily flows. You can like something without wanting to do it again, but also you can reminisce about your past. That's what reminiscing is, that's what nostalgia is. The second logic that Ben uses is because of the high-pitched chipmunk vocals in the song, which kind of could sound like a 13-year-old girl. He's promoting sex with 13-year-olds. But by this logic, Ben Shapiro is saying that anytime he hears a voice that he likes, he thinks that he wants to have sex with them, which just doesn't make any sense. That's not the reason you put vocals you like in a song. You put vocals you like in a song because you like the vocals. It doesn't mean you like the person. It doesn't mean you want to have sex with them. It just means you like how the song sounds. Now, I would think that most people don't stand by this now, but I think he still does because, one, it's not up on his correction page, which he displays so proudly, as if changing your mind is groundbreaking and he's the first person to do it. But also, he still has these same opinions when he talks about songs like WAP. And man, it just shows you don't understand music, which is fine, you don't have to understand music, but don't try and use it to support this major point like you know everything and you're always right. The reason Ben does this is because he just can't accept that he doesn't understand this music. He needs to be objectively right all the time. That's his whole brand, right? He might not admit that that's his brand, but that is his brand. He's known as like the big logic guy who's always smart and always rational. And so if he gets something wrong, then he can't live through that persona anymore. But he really wants that persona. He really wants to be seen as a smart logic guy, even if he's not. And the final thing I wanted to say is there was a Lizzo controversy where she played a flute. Yeah, that was it. She played a flute. And conservatives are pretty pissed because black people can't play flutes. Now, they'll try and give whatever reason they want as to why she shouldn't be able to play the flute. But the fact of the matter is, she is a musician, she studied how to play the flute professionally, and she played the flute. That was it. The fact that they care about this so much shows that this whole game for them is just a culture war. They don't actually care about anything. They just care about the game. It's all a game to them. Anyway, this video was a little bit of rambling. I didn't really have a major point to say. I just wanted to say that Ben Shapiro is a little bit silly, a little bit stupid, a little bit ridiculous even, and I don't think we should take him seriously on music or anything. And if Ben Shapiro wants to do a battle with me, we can have a little music battle. I know he plays violin, I play guitar. Maybe we can do a little bit of a battle. I could probably play more notes than him a second, so I think that makes me the better instrumentalist.